My name's Bob Moran. I'm a cartoonist here in the UK, and I'm in Bristol today at the UK Column Live event.
And how did you get into being a cartoonist, Miles?
I've always drawn cartoons since I was really small. I mean, as soon as I could draw, I drew funny pictures to make people laugh. I started with my family and friends, and then at school I moved on to teachers. Got into quite a lot of trouble at school for drawing teachers. They gave me detentions, but then by the time I finished school, a lot of them who I hadn't drawn were coming up to me and asking me to draw them before I left, which was quite interesting. And during my time at school, I discovered that there was this job of being a cartoonist for newspapers, and sort of realised that was what I was cut out to do. So it was the only thing I then wanted to do, and that's obviously a very tricky thing to get into. There aren't many job openings that come up. There are only about 15 positions in the UK. Generally, you have to wait for someone to die. So when I finished university, I would just send work to editors and magazines all the time, hoping they would see it. Most of them never got back to me. But eventually, I got a break in 2010. One summer, the Guardian cartoonist went off on holiday. They let me cover for them for a few weeks. And then about a year later, I got the job at the Telegraph, where I was for 10 years.
And when was it you started waking up to what was going on? Were you always sceptical, or
Not really. I mean, obviously, I'm naturally sceptical because I'm a satirist, you know. So I poke fun at authority, and you know, I sort of questioned things to an extent, but I had always trusted the system in that I knew that there were kind of corrupt politicians and liars, but I always thought there was a point beyond which things couldn't go, and that they were fundamentally decent, or there were some decent people in the system, and I benefited from it, you know, and I ended up in the mainstream media, and I had a really good position, and I enjoyed my position. You know, it's exciting being at a newspaper. You feel like you're this kind of important cog in the machine that's keeping everyone's lives going. So it wasn't really until 2020, when everything started with the whole pandemic narrative, that I began slowly to realise that I knew immediately it wasn't right, and I knew there was something off about it, and I kind of very quickly understood that there was no argument for doing it, that whatever the truth was about the virus, or whether there was a pandemic, or what was being done, wasn't supposed to be able to happen in a democracy. So
where did you get those values from?
I think from my parents. It turns out, you know, they'd obviously instilled them in me at some point. But again, I never realised how much these values meant to me until they were under threat. You know, I would never have imagined that I'd risk my whole career to defend those values. And at the beginning, it didn't feel like there would be any risk. You know, I didn't think, I'm going to have to be really brave and outspoken here, and I could end up being fired because it seemed so obvious to me. I thought, you know, within a few weeks, everybody will be agreeing with what I'm saying, everyone will see it. You know, one of the reasons I began to get suspicious that there was some kind of plan or some kind of agenda was precisely that didn't happen, and the few people who were pointing these things out were immediately being silenced, fired, cancelled, suppressed. So it kind of went from there, really.
What was the pushback like in the Telegraph? Had you ever felt pressured before to make your cartoons a certain way, or?
Yeah, I mean, obviously when you work for a newspaper, there's a lot of editorial control. It's a collaborative thing. You know, you're drawing for a specific readership. The newspaper takes certain lines on different stories, on different political characters. So you're not free to just draw whatever you like. That's the nature of the job, is that you have to look at the news, kind of pick a story, think up an idea that might work for a cartoon, then you have to run it past the editors, and they will either say, yeah, that's great, or no, that doesn't work for us. And some days they might say, oh, you can't draw that because he's writing for us tomorrow, or the editor's having lunch with him next week, or there'll be things like that all the time. And I just didn't really think much of it. I thought this is obviously how the media works, and it didn't bother me. And then it took a long time because I was only 25 when I started, and I didn't really understand, lots of things about how a newspaper works. So it took a number of years to kind of earn enough trust that I could sometimes argue for an idea. If they said, "Oh, no, I don't think people get that," or "That's not quite right," they would trust me when I said, "No, this is going to work." And actually, when in the early part of 2020, they were actually fine with me taking the line that I did, which was very much a moral opposition to the lockdowns. They were okay with that, even though the newspaper was peppered with opposite views, and they obviously were getting loads of money for the government propaganda. There was never any pressure from my sort of direct employers, from the editors and people. There were other colleagues who were kind of complaining about me and attacking me on social media and things, but I was told not to worry about that, until I was suddenly fired. So, then I did have to worry. Yeah.
And where did you go? What have you been doing since you were fired?
So after I left the Telegraph, I wasn't bombarded with offers, and I knew that no mainstream platform was going to offer me another job, because of the way I'd been fired, basically, which was kind of generally the public perception was it was kind of in disgrace. So I had a few offers for different things, and I ended up working for a charity that's based in Canada for a year, and they were basically offered to pay me a sort of modest salary to produce 3 cartoons every week, but they gave me complete editorial freedom. So as long as they covered the issues that were going on in the world that were relevant to Canadians and everyone else, then they left me alone, which was perfect. So I did that for the first year, for 2022. Then we kind of ended that relationship amicably at the end, because I'd kind of built up a big enough audience by that point, and I had enough people buying, prints and originals that, and obviously because they're a charity, I said, you should use your money to help people, because the charity was set up to help people who've been fined for breaking lockdowns and that type of thing. So since then, I've been totally independent, which is great.
How's it feel?
Yeah, it's amazing, because I have total freedom now. Everything I do is entirely me. I can choose what I draw, when I draw it. It's a different kind of pressure. Obviously I no longer have the pressure of deadlines of a newspaper, or the pressure of editors saying they want this or that. But when you are on your own, it's a different kind of pressure, because you have to own your mistakes. In the past, if someone didn't like something I did, or they thought I got something wrong, I could always say, "Oh, it was the editor's idea," or whatever. Now it's all me. I have to really own what I do. I have to really think about what I'm saying and how I'm saying it, and when is the right time to say it. And I'm conscious now that even my own audience, who've been following me all this time, who are very loyal, could disagree with something I do at any point. It's actually really important that I don't let that bother me.
Yeah.
If I think something needs saying and it's true, I will draw it, even if it loses me support.
Because they'll respect you for it, regardless.
Well, some of them do, some of them don't. But that's what creativity, and especially satire, should be. One of the things I've come to understand is that proper satire, when it's needed, can only be effective outside of the system. You have to be on the periphery, looking in, or you are always neutered to some extent. And satire can't be like that. It has to have integrity. It has to be able to take risks and shock people, and not compromise at all, not feel aligned to any political party, or anything like that, or any brand. Yeah.
So you being sacked from the Telegraph was perhaps the best thing that ever happened to you?
Yes, now I would say it definitely is. I mean, it was a worry for a few months, obviously.
Wife and kids and everything.
Yeah, I had wife and children and a mortgage to pay, and I'd worked my whole life to get to that position. And I'd only just a few years before been given a full-time employment contract, which I never thought I would get. So I had a salary and a pension and paid holiday, which someone who does what I do nowadays would never get something like that. And to lose all of that was obviously not ideal. But I just had to trust that my skills, what I could do, and the people who wanted me to do it would be enough. And it was, because this movement is huge. There's millions of people all around the world. And I had managed to build up a much bigger audience, it turned out, than I ever had at the newspaper anyway.
I was going to ask about your new book. Is it okay if I grab a copy so you can hold it?
Yeah, that's fine, yeah.
Wonderful Bob.
So this is your new book. Do you want to talk about it?
Yeah, this is my new book. Now, people have been asking me to do a book since 2020, basically, all the time. And I always wanted to do a book, but I thought, well, I should probably wait till there's enough to go in a book and there's a kind of story to tell. Obviously, throughout 2020 and 2021, things were changing every week. We had no idea what was going to happen next. So at the beginning of this year, I thought now is probably the right time to put a book together. And also, I didn't want to just do a kind of run-of-the-mill paperback kind of thing. I thought I want to do something quite special, not only because it covers such an important period of history, but as a kind of to show my appreciation for the people who supported me for this whole time. So it's a very nice quality hardback book with 240 pages.
Chocker.
And it's printed on very, very nice heavy paper. There's a bit of writing at the start, basically about my journey over the last few years, about the media, how I see myself now. This is a little bit about my process, how I actually make my cartoons, all the materials I use.
Branston pickle.
And then, yes, it's very dear to me, my Branston pickle jar that I mix my paint with. I've had that for about 15 years, so it's sacred. And and then it's just almost all the cartoons from the period. Some of the sketches are in here, so you can see some of my kind of doodles I do while I'm working out ideas. There are a few that never actually became finished cartoons, but that are quite interesting anyway. And there's an index at the back which just says the titles of all of them and the dates of publication.
So it's a proper historical record.
Yeah, obviously it's a historical record for people to look back on. It's also just a record of my thought process. You can go through it and see how my thinking changed and developed. At the same time, retaining the core principles that motivate me to do the work, which I think is really important. I've covered all these different issues, drawn all these different characters, but my philosophy is consistent, which is something that we're lacking now. I think it's part of the big problem. And I think it's important that people can see in the future, I hope, that whether they agree or disagree, somebody did actually think really carefully about this stuff and took the time to do all these pictures, and their thoughts are consistent, which is what we're in danger of losing as a society.
So what's your advice to anyone up and coming who wants to do what you do or do any other sort of art today?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I would say don't work for a newspaper, not a mainstream one.
Maybe the Light.
The Light paper is great. There are exceptions, obviously, UK Column and the Light. Real journalism does still exist. I think it's difficult when you're young and you're starting out and you're very distracted by working out your style and what materials you use, and you're kind of imitating other artists, and you're having to learn how to work faster, and you have to go through all of that. But once you kind of hit on something that you care about, some values you really care about, and understand you have a way of putting that across with your art in a different way, in a way other people can't, that's when you really kind of start to go places and build an audience and just really love what you're doing. Yeah.
So how's it been being at the UK Column event?
It's been fantastic. Just a massive crowd of brilliant, like-minded people, and really interesting speakers. Just reflecting on what's happened and the state of the world, which is obviously pretty dire, but being positive, and everyone's having a great time, which is the most important thing, I think. Stay positive, keep laughing at these people, because that breaks the spell, So, yeah, keep laughing.
Beautiful. Where do people find you in your book?
So, my website is bobmoran.co.uk. You can order the book through there. You can also get prints and buy original paintings. I'm on social media at Bob's Cartoons. I'm on Instagram, Bob Moran _artist, I think, on Instagram, and Telegram as well.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
That was a pleasure. That was lovely.
Join our Patreon and get access to exclusive behind-the-scenes content. You can see everything behind the scenes.
We're talking about mobile phones and how dangerous they are.
Our podcasts, our guests, and any other bits that we pick up along the way that we don't put on the main channel. You can also see any bits that we do with Defiance Records. So please do support us and just help us do what we do, and thanks to everyone who does support us. But yeah, we could do with more help. Please do join us. Consider coming down to our upcoming Resistance GB Live. You can meet the guests, you can engage. We've got Kate Chemrani supported by fantastic freedom band Whom by Fire. It's Thursday, 31st of October, down at Finsbury Park's The Night Owl. Doors open 5:30.